I'm James Osmond. For those of you who hadn't made the connection, Charlie is my younger and very frustratingly slimmer brother. When he talked at the start this morning about setting up Triptease and having to beg, borrow, and steal money from friends and family, I was the family. And this is how he repays me in terms of getting myself to stand in front of hundreds of people and tell them all about the exciting world of rate parity. So in the last 6 days, I think we've all been through a little bit of a journey when it comes to the world of regulation and politics and politicians. I think we all probably have a slightly deeper understanding of the fact that these people change our lives. They change and shape our culture, and they change and shape our businesses. And so, whilst it sometimes can seem a little bit dry, regulation is incredibly important. And it's very important, obviously, for the world of direct booking, because when it comes to rate parity, that can have a big impact on customers, what they see around prices. So we are very, very privileged today to have an outstanding speaker who has joined us to talk about the world of regulation and how it might begin to evolve. And that is Ufi. Ufi, Ibrahim, is the Chief Executive of the British Hospitality Association. So over the last 6 years in that role, she has worked tirelessly campaigning for the interests of 40,000 hotels and businesses across Britain. If you have the pleasure of spending even 2 minutes with Ufi, you will discover 3 things about her, or 3 things from her. The first one is just how incredibly proud and committed she is when it comes to the hospitality industry. You will also likely learn that in Britain, the hospitality industry is the 4th largest employer. So it employs something like 4.2 million people across Britain, which is extraordinary. You will also learn that over the last 5 years, when Britain has been recording pretty good growth in employment, it's actually the hospitality industry that's making the difference there. 1 in 3 new jobs created in Britain over the last 5 years has been in hospitality. So she has very much to be proud of and is clearly making a difference to our economy and to the hospitality industry. So please welcome Ufi. Come on over. Right, the world of rate parity has evolved quite a lot in the last 12 months. So I thought I'd just do a quick, hopefully no more than 2-minute scene setter on what's been going on. So the world of rate parity historically has been about broad parity agreements. Broad parity agreements, also known as most favored nation. That is where a hotel agrees with an OTA that they're not going to provide cheaper prices to anybody else. No other OTA, and they won't put cheaper prices on their own hotel website. That was seen by some regulators across Europe as being a bit problematic in terms of price competition. And there are a number of investigations were launched in places like France and Italy and Sweden. In response to that, Booking.com last summer decided to introduce a new concept around narrow rate parity, which provided a little bit more flexibility for hotels. So narrow rate parity means that the hotel can provide rates to another OTA that are cheaper than the rate that they've provided to one OTA. But they still can't provide cheaper rates on the hotel's website. Okay, that's the key thing. Following that, there were further events. So in France, the Macron laws decided to outlaw rate parity entirely. And then a few months later, in Germany, I'm going to struggle to pronounce it, the Bundeskartellamt, which is the federal cartel office, they decided to prevent Booking.com from also providing narrow rate parity. So they ruled it out entirely for Booking.com on the basis of needing more price competition. So that is the world we inhabit at the moment. Italy is also in the midst of passing a law to outlaw narrow rate parity in Italy. So we have narrow rate parity is generally the standard across Europe, except for in France, except for in Germany for Booking.com, and probably shortly not to be allowed any further in Italy. Everybody got it? Yeah, simple stuff. So, my first question. Who's got it right? The French or the British?
Well, I think that the British have been very slow to react. the British regulator. I won't make too many comments about other regulators
Please
because I don't work very closely with them. But certainly the Lords Select Committee, we did a lot of work with the Lords Select Committee, and in the words of the House of Lords Select Committee themselves, the speed with which businesses in the digital economy, particularly in terms of their merger and acquisition activity, have grown to become dominant anti-competitive forces in the market, that speed has not been matched with the regulators' speed. So the regulators in the United Kingdom, certainly, I can say, have been extremely slow to react and respond. And when we see developments in France and in Germany, of course, we, the United Kingdom, get extremely anxious, and the sense of importance and urgency with which we want the UK regulator to respond heightens. So yes, we're not getting it right in the United Kingdom.
And why do you think that is? What is it the regulators need to feel, know, experience in order to speed things up?
Well, you know, I think the way that regulators actually look at the market is very different to the way that we look at the market. When they look at the market, they usually tend to try to look at the whole digital economy as a single activity. And they also always look to the customer. So the Competition Markets Authority feel that it is their duty of responsibility to act in the interest of the consumer, not necessarily directly in the interests of the business. So the anti-competitive behavior, the actual evidence that this is harmful to the consumer, has been very slow in reaching the Competition Markets Authority or other regulators in the United Kingdom. What's been faster has been the dazzling, sparkling lobby of these very deep-pocketed businesses who are massive tech giants, who have absolutely succeeded in convincing the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, the Chancellor of the Exchequer of the United Kingdom, and other ministers in the UK that the United Kingdom should become the global capital of the digital economy. And certainly when you look at digital activity across European Union countries, it's very clear that the UK, and please don't ask me to define unicorns, but certainly the United Kingdom is outpacing the other countries of the European Union in terms of the number of unicorns, these digital unicorns that have been established in the UK. So there is a national ambition led by number 10 Downing Street and number 11 Downing Street. And then you have the Competition Markets Authority, who have, I think, as I said, taken a very long time to actually see evidence that this is harmful to the consumer. And even today, we're continually pushing the Competition Markets Authority to actually act on what has now been given to them as an instruction by the House of Lords Select Committee to undertake a review and investigate this anti-competitive behavior and the harmful impacts on the consumer. It's taken a very long time for us to get here.
Yeah, and the House of Lords Commission is quite an interesting one because they did come out seeming to be quite definitive that more action needed to be taken and further investigation. So you gave a submission to them. What was the kind of the key evidence and theme that you put in front of them that helped to convince them that actually rate parity is not working and needs further investigation?
Yeah, so the House of Lords Select Committee reviewed a given number of industries. It wasn't just our industry, so we had to compete in order to be given due attention to our sector. But I found myself sitting alongside the representatives of the printing industry, books, talking about the impact of Amazon, for example, and many other sectors, interesting sectors. Learned a lot, actually, about what was happening in other sectors. Interestingly, there are some similarities across the board. But at the end of the day, the House of Lords Select Committee agreed that this issue is so complex and subtle for each given sector that a very tailored approach will be required by the competition markets authorities to actually investigate each specific industry. So what did we actually present in terms of what needed investigation? The first thing was to actually educate and inform the Select Committee that over the past few years, two big dominant players have come on as the duopoly of online travel distribution. So Priceline, who have acquired Booking.com and continue to acquire businesses have now achieved about half of all online travel distribution worldwide, and Expedia, following that, another quarter at least of all global travel distribution. And looking at projections, it appears that within just a few years, these two organizations representing a duopoly will actually dominate 94% of all online travel distribution globally, which is significant. So that was the first thing that we had to inform and educate the Select Committee on, is that we are actually operating in an anti-competitive market. And what does this mean for the businesses and the consumer? Well, we also provided a lot of evidence on the abuse of the dominant position that these two organizations play, and the way in which they are actually abusing that position with businesses. So,
could you give us some examples?
Absolutely. So, the whole negotiation with hotels, the contractual agreements, the demands, the fact that, for example, penalties are introduced and exercised if hotels do not, if hotels, don't provide availability during peak times, for example, the fact that the OTAs then drop them down on the listings, making them pretty invisible, particularly if they're a small player online because of their dominant position on the internet. The opaque nature of the information provided to the customer, the fact that the customer is led to believe that listings are based on outstanding service or the product, the quality of the search, not necessarily clear on the fact that there are commercial implications to where a hotel is listed, and that it's an additional 3% on top of very high commission rates going up to 25% plus 3% to be able to give you visibility on that scale. And then being able to provide evidence that with these very high commission rates, this is having an impact at the end on the customer. Because in order to manage this huge chunk out of the P&L to a hotel's bottom line, hotels are having to inflate their prices in order to be able to adjust to that. So at the end of the day, always bringing it back to the impact on the customer.
Okay, very interesting. I guess there is another view, which is the one that was articulated by Booking.com last summer when France ruled out rate parity laws, which is that the second you remove those rules, there's just going to be a price war, and actually the hoteliers will suffer. Do you agree?
I've had a lot of mixed feedback from hoteliers and others about rate parity. But what I can say is this, and in fact I have to say that these words were given to me, articulated extremely clearly by Rishi, sitting over there from IHG. When I discussed with Rishi and I said, Rishi, I'm getting so much feedback from members. I think we had this conversation about 6 to 8 months ago, saying actually, I even got an article from someone saying rate parity was actually created by a hotelier,
right?
Not by an OTA. So it's very ironic that now you representing hotels are out there saying rate parity should be banned in the United Kingdom. How do you justify that? And I turned to Rishi and I said, what's the answer? And he articulated it very well. So he said, and correct me, Rishi, if I don't get this right word for word, he said, even if rate parity acts in the interests of the hotel, it should not be enforced upon hoteliers by online travel agents when there is a contractual negotiation. It should be an option. It is not an option. They are currently enforcing it upon hotels. And it's not just parity over dictating rates over online distribution, it applies to on and offline rates offered by hotels as well. So you can tell our position is very clear. We think rate parity should be banned, and if not, at the very least, should not be able to be enforced upon hoteliers as a matter of course in their agreements.
So in your experience, how have you seen hoteliers respond to contracts around rate parity and the pressure to sign those? Have you come across examples of interesting techniques?
Well, the beauty of our industry is that we are a very flat industry. In other words, we have a very large number of very small businesses in our industry versus one or two, arguably, larger businesses. So I think the last figure I heard was 86% of our businesses employ fewer than 10 people, which is remarkable. And we're talking, by the way, about in excess of 100,000 hotel companies. So, the scale is massive. How can those small operators possibly have any bargaining power when it comes to negotiating with these dominant forces who can literally make them invisible to the customer online? That is a key point. So in terms of how one begins to negotiate, or what we're seeing, the feedback we're getting from members in terms of any flex on negotiating these contracts and agreements, the smaller the business, the less the flex. There is no flex. And we are getting very alarming bits of news from the smaller the company, the more complex the issues. I was with a member yesterday, I won't name the hotelier, but saying, and now on top of everything else, the OTA is demanding that we pay commission on the rate including VAT. Who are they to take a commission on VAT? So every day we're hearing evidence of new, interesting abuse of dominant power of the online travel agents.
So how do you change this? It's a big challenge. How do independent hoteliers in the UK, across Europe, how do they change the legislation around this?
So when we, one of the good things that we achieved, tiny little things we achieved, actually a very incremental tiny thing we achieved when the OFT investigation was taking place, was the ability for hotel companies to also be able to offer a further discount to closed user groups. Because the OFT's initial proposal to us was that that would be something given to the OTAs, and we had to actually fight to be able to get that for hotels as well. So now we're seeing a large number of hotels actually looking into their loyalty programs and beginning to offer, the attraction and the pull to people who are members of those loyalty programs, which is great. But the smaller the business,
it's still very hard to do.
Very, very hard to do. So I think it should be, there should be assurance that there is an organization acting on behalf of the collective, and we will continue to fight in a very, very aggressive way, whether we are in the European Union or not. So we're at the moment talking about, now escalating this to the World Trade Organization and others in order to be able to focus the attention of the incoming Prime Minister and Chancellor on this issue. But there are many things that SMEs can do. And I have to be very honest and frank, as I always am. We went to the board of directors of the BHA, I did, and I said, look at these fantastic precedents being set in France and in Germany. We would very much like to be able to create a court case in the United Kingdom and take this to the courts. And the board said the financial consequences of that would be very, very high. It's a big risk to the association, unless we can actually find the financial clout to be able to do it. So imagine if an association of a collective cannot have the financial clout to do that. It's impossible for any particular single individual hotel or Triptease.
Or Triptease, yeah.
Or Triptease, for that matter, to be able to do that. So the board's directive to the BHA was take action to help to inform and educate and equip the SMEs in our industry to be able to either leverage their relationships with the OTAs, because OTAs do play a very important and valuable role in terms of visibility, and B, help them to be able to get more business without having to use OTAs. So we're very pleased that we have created new partnerships. Triptease, we're working very closely with Triptease. I'm delighted to see Britta here from Germany, our partner, from Hotel Partner, and we're in discussions with other businesses, and we're bringing together a whole educational program which is going to be provided completely on a complementary basis to really help to inform and educate SMEs up and down the country to actually be able to do more on their own through alternative channels and in the OTA channels to actually be much smarter and much more agile in getting better leverage on their investments. And that program is kicking off imminently. We're just developing all those tools now. In fact, we did a wonderful little pilot in Bournemouth recently, which we talked about at the summit on Monday, which has been hugely successful. And TripAdvisor, interestingly, are very keen on helping us as well, I guess for obvious reasons.
And I guess one of the key things a hotel can do, which we've experienced as well, is just gathering more evidence, because that's what you need in order to convince the politicians that this is making a difference to hotels and ultimately to consumers. So the more evidence there is, the more that's submitted, the easier the conversation gets. Is that fair? You're nodding ahead.
Absolutely, absolutely fair. We always contact our members for information. If you are a member and you do get those emails, please provide us with that information, because that all feeds into the evidence base with which we can actually convince the regulator of the impact on the market and the consumer, and that will get us to the goal in a much faster, much more effective way.
Fantastic. Have we got time for a question or two? Have we got one? Yeah. Jogging round.
Thank you, Andrew Sangster, hotel analyst. Ufi, if I could just make a general comment on this. I mean, you referred to an article in an industry magazine pointing out the hoteliers had introduced that. That was actually us, I think. And just to recap on that, that was back in 2003 when IHG introduced a manifesto, and they delisted all their rooms out of Expedia and had this standoff for 18 months with Expedia. Part of that manifesto was that the OTAs don't sell rooms for less than the hoteliers listing them. So what the problem was then is that they weren't able to control what was going on, and so they insisted that they weren't undercut by OTAs. I'm not sure that in those 13 years since then, we are, as an industry, better placed to actually take on the OTAs. I mean, the clear evidence is the OTAs are much, much stronger. If you look at their marketing budgets, they are 10 times, if not 20 times bigger today than they were back then. So I think that I've got a real fear. Be careful what you wish for within this. A second point, if you just allow me, in terms of regulation, I mean, there's the adage, you know, if you're waiting for regulation to save you, you are dead as a business. I think that really applies. And the early part of my career, I was a journalist working at the Campaign for Real Ale, tough job, 2 breweries a month, etc. But part of what we saw in that industry was, I think, 33 inquiries instituted by the OFT, a succession over about a period of a couple of decades, and it just completely messed up that entire industry. And we see, you know, we have an industry which is completely now in the hands of, sort of 2 global producers. There's made not one jot of difference, all of those investigations. And if anything, it made the whole situation considerably worse. So I just have a real fear if this is seen as a solution and as an approach for people in this room.
Thank you very much, Ufi. Wonderful to have your insights and input. Thank you.
Thank you. I just do, if I may,
Yeah.
just want to respond to the point on waiting. If you wait for regulation, you're dead. You know, it's very risky to be for any business to be able to ignore regulation. I think that all the recent evidence, as James said in the introduction, even in the last 6 days, shows you that you simply cannot do that. The markets are affected by regulation. Investment, consumer confidence, businesses' whole operations, their plans, their strategies, everything is affected by regulation. And while you may not be able to expect results depending on the areas of regulation that you are fighting in the short term, it is absolutely imperative, as I'm very pleased to say 44,000 businesses understand in this country, that you must fight regulation and ensure that it keeps up with the mass globalization of the digital economy in this particular case, and other areas which are affecting our businesses. We haven't even had time to talk about the sharing economy, but perhaps another day. But I would just reiterate the absolute importance of ensuring that regulation is on the radar of every business.
Fabulous. Thank you very much, Ufi. Thanks.
Thanks, James.
Thank you.